Good evening, everybody. So I have 2 to 3 minutes to introduce the best-known Roman historian of our generation. An impossible task unless I gibber like an auctioneer. What to pick out from the vast array of accomplishments that surround her like a cloud, both revealing and obscuring the real Dame Winifred Mary Beard. DBE, FSA, FBA, and FRSL. These are a lot of honorary initials. DBE refers, of course, to her position as Dame Commander of the most excellent order of the British Empire. And Mary has in fact proven to be a one-woman army, a modern Penthesilea, Queen of the Amazons, in several regards, especially in support of female academics in a world that for a long time was predominantly male. As for FSA, FBA, and FRSL, I apologize, but you will have to look up all those other acronyms on your own time. I have it on good authority that none of them is associated with degrees in dentistry or accounting. Mary is now a giant figure in the field of Roman history herself, with 20 acclaimed books and multiple awards that, if I were to read them out loud, would exceed my allotted 3 minutes. Her contributions to our knowledge of antiquity often focus on marginalized groups such as slaves, women, and plebs, and shed new light on traditional narratives and exploring the diverse experiences of different social groups. But the aspect of her career that I'd like to emphasize here is how well she juggles being an extremely public figure, well known through the BBC, through her 200,000 followers on Twitter, and through her blog, A Don's Life, in the TLS, where she's also the classics editor. I'd like to focus on how well she juggles these public responsibilities with being a serious researcher and scholar, a fellow of the British Academy with honorary degrees from Yale and Oxford, and a leading light in classical scholarship. As a classics professor myself, with book sales rising into the high double digits, I am struck by this bridge that Mary has built between the public world and the world of academia. She is one of the few people alive who could write a book on Roman history that is compulsively readable. I was in fact reading her best-selling tome, SPQR, a few years ago while going through the security line at O'Hare Airport. As the book trundled along the conveyor belt, a deft CSA employee reached over to grab it and started leafing through the pages. Wow, I thought, even an airport security agent cannot resist taking a look. But as he handed it back to me, he belied my assumption by saying with a scowl, "Don't bring thick books aboard. They can be used to hide guns." Despite her many weighty books, however, I'm skeptical that Mary is leading an international crime ring. She did have a television program called Caligula with Mary Beard, but that does not mean that she endorsed Caligula's views or has called for us to elect horses to the US Senate, as he famously did. I happen to also know that when she recently retired from Cambridge, she donated a significant sum of money to provide fellowships for children from traditionally underrepresented groups to read classics at Cambridge. I cannot think of anything more in line with Paideia's mission than this generous act. And then there's her series of free videos aimed at high school kids at British schools with no way to learn about the classical world. I've learned that the actress Rachel Weisz pitched in her time for free on this video series. And I just want to say, Mary, for my sake, George Clooney next time, please. It is in recognition of all this scholarship, leadership, and generosity that Mary is now receiving the Arete Award from the Paideia Institute. As we say in Latin, Macte virtutis esto. It's an honor extremely well-deserved. Bravo, Mary.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Shadi. We'll talk about some of that in the morning, I think. Thank you to the Paideia Institute, everybody who's arranged this for the honour, not just the honour, for the perfect organisation too. I know how difficult it is. And thank you, Thomas, as well. I haven't bored you with my knee problems, but make a hasty escape before I do. And I think if you're going to swap boring titles for theses, I can almost outdo you, right? My PhD thesis was, and I have to say, it was never published for obvious reasons, The State Religion in the Late Roman Republic, a study based on the works of Cicero. Now, I thought that was great, but since Robert Harris has made Cicero a great star, I think it might now find a publisher. But back then, it looked extremely boring, and I think probably was. I want to tell you just a little bit of my own story, actually, about how I got into the ancient world. And that was more than 60 years ago, when I was 5, and this was in 1960, and you can now work out exactly how old I am. And I was brought up in a little village in rural Shropshire, which is on the border between England and Wales. And when I was 5, my mum, who was the village school teacher, thought it would be a good idea that I went to London and saw what a city was like, because there were no cities anywhere near where we lived. So we did go to London, and one of the things we did was we went to the British Museum. And I was, at that stage, like kind of every 5-year-old, I think, or, many 5-year-olds, let's say, dead keen on Egyptian mummies, right? That's what you wanted to see. You wanted to see the dead bodies of ancient Egypt. And we did that in the British Museum, and it was extremely exciting. But my mum, who was, of course, a very, who was a school teacher who saw there was more to ancient Egypt than dead bodies, said that we should go to the Everyday Life Gallery in the British Museum, the everyday life of ancient Egypt. And I think there might be some people in the audience who remember what museums were like back in 1960, but they were not child-friendly. The cases started about there, right? No kid could ever see into them. So this was all being a bit difficult. And then my mum, and we got our bags with us, and it was all quite hard and cumbersome, said, "Oh my goodness me, at the back of that case, there's a piece of Egyptian cake 4,000 years old," right? I thought, that's what I want to see. Stop the mummies, I want to see the Egyptian cake. But I couldn't see it, it was at the back of the case. So she said, I've got to lift you up. We got bags, and she tried to lift me, but I was wriggly. And at that moment, what seemed to me then like an old bloke came along. I suspect he was pushing 40. And he said, was I looking for anything in particular? And I said, that piece of cake, at the back of the case, right? And he must have been a curator, because he put his hands in his pockets, he got some keys out, he unlocked the case, he put his hands in the back of the case, and he got the cake out, and he put it right in front of my nose, right? And it was amazing. It was wondrous, it was surprising, it was magical, and it was what the Greeks would have called thauma, the kind of magic wonder that makes you think differently about the world. That little piece of 4,000-year-old Egyptian cake changed my life. And I will come back to it as I finish. I have now to confess that I never did go on to learn hieroglyphs, which would have been the natural and predictable end of this story. But I did go on to a high school where I was lucky enough to be able to learn Latin and Greek. And one of the reasons that I'm so, very much behind what the Paideia Institute wants to do is because it's helping people do that when they don't have necessarily an easy opportunity at high school like I did. So I was rather drilled in Latin and Greek, but I also was able to explore the Romans beneath my feet in Shropshire, where we came from, and do archaeological excavations and all that kind of stuff, in which I think the wonder of it all, the sheer magic that moment of the cake represented, really never went away. And that was partly the material remains. It was partly picking up the bit of pottery that nobody had picked up, since 100 CE or whatever. That is magical. But it was also reading the stuff, the really interesting, engaging, and surprising stuff, like the Catullus you mentioned, Thomas, that people had written such a long time ago. And it gave me a different perspective on what history was. The history was there, it could be touched, it was immediate, it was in front of us, it was accessible. But I think it also gave me a very important, different perspective on myself. And I think that's why in the end we look so carefully, and we want to look so carefully at the ancient world. It's not because we're just interested in the ancients, they are very interesting, but we're also interested in ourselves and in what antiquity makes us rethink about us. And that happened to me, in spades, even before I got to university. Now, I think that classicists in general can be a bit of a gloomy lot, I have to say, right? And I've been part of this, and I plead guilty. We tend to kind of lament all the things that we don't know about the ancient world. We have so little literature written by women. We have some, but very little. So little literature written by slaves. Again, some, but very little. I think that what for me has been important for a career of now decades studying classics, what has been important for me is thinking how much there is that survives. What's amazing about the ancient Greco-Roman world is not that we have so little of it, it's that we have so much. mention Marcus Aurelius. I don't very much like Marcus Aurelius, I have to confess, but it's just absolutely bloody amazing, isn't it? That what a Roman emperor jotted down to himself when he was thrashing some unfortunate barbarians, which is what he was doing, that actually survives. And, you know, I think that classics is a world in which you can happily, you don't have to, but you can spend a lifetime. That there is more literature written in Latin and Greek than anybody could read carefully in the course of one lifetime. And it is really worth doing. So I think there is a kind of huge importance in, you know, in rejecting the sort of gloomy view about what we don't know. We don't know about the ancient economy. They didn't even have a word for economics or whatever. What we've got is huge amounts of really engaging stuff. Right? You know, when people, you know, and I'm so behind what Paideia is wanting to do, because to actually give people an access to that in the original language is different. Look, we all read translations. I read translations. You know, if I'm going to look up a passage of Dio Cassius, I don't instantly go to the Greek. I don't. Sorry. I might go later to the Greek, but I don't. That's not my first port of call. But the really important thing is that we have access to a world that is thousands of years different and apart from our own. So I think that, you know, why do we need Paideia? Because we don't want to lose that. We really don't want to lose that. I think classicists are also a terribly nostalgic lot too. And they have a kind of myth, which I was brought up on, that people before us always did classics better than we do. You know, that, you know, 100 years ago, you know, every British little boy aged 12 could translate Latin better than I ever could. Now, I don't think that's actually true, you know? And I think that, you know, classics has thrived thinking that since about the 2nd century CE. You know, when they always believed that people in the 1st century CE knew better than they did, right? And you know, actually, we're doing better than the past, or my experience suggests that we are doing better. Now, I have to say here that, yeah, I'm not saying that unaware of funding cuts, unaware of the assault on the humanities, unaware of the need for support for humanities subjects and humanities skills and expertise like classics. I think there's a rather a vitriolic and unpleasant campaign against the humanities, actually, and I'm not going to start on my defence of them, but if anybody wants to ask me afterwards why I think humanities need preserving in general, I'm very happy to say. But I think my experiences are quite different from that nostalgic view. My experience is that studying Latin and Greek and the civilization that goes with it, and I'll call it civilization, perhaps in inverted commas, perhaps not, but but still civilization. I think it's got better in my lifetime. And it's partly got better because the kind of people who are doing it have expanded. Right? And they've got more diverse, more different, more interesting. And when I was a student, and we're now back in the 1970s, classics was studied by and large, posh, rich, white men at Cambridge. It wasn't entirely the case. It can't have been entirely the case because they let me in and I wasn't a posh, rich, white man. But it was a very monocultural subject. What happened over my career as a teacher at Cambridge, which was 40 years or so, is that not quick enough, and it's still not finished, was that we here, and I think you in the US, brought new people, more diverse people, into the subject with different questions, with different areas to debate and different disagreements. And that hugely revivified the subject. The kind of things that students are asking now about the ancient world are just a cut above what we used to ask in the 1970s. And that's partly because they're coming with different questions from different places and have a different engagement with the ancient world. That means, and you can read it in the New York Times anytime you want, that means there's increasing debates within classics and increasing disagreements about what the subject is. I think that's all to the good, hugely healthy. The last thing we want is a subject that everybody agrees that what it should be about. The health of a subject is partly represented, not just by the expertise that goes into it, but by the fact that people feel it's worth arguing about. And that is certainly the case for the Greco-Roman world and the neighbours of the Greco-Roman world who are increasingly being brought into the picture after, when I was a teenager, we learned about the Persian Wars without ever studying the Persians, I mean, it's like, now it just seems mad, And so things have changed, and I think actually that, there is a bit of a culture, there's no subject on earth in Western Europe and the US that isn't somehow engaged in a culture war. But I have no doubt in saying that classics is getting better, more interesting, and that what Paideia is doing is actually helping people engage in those debates. So I think we're hugely grateful to this. But I suppose to go back to my man in the British Museum, and I think, what did he teach me? Now, obviously I've slightly mythicized this. I've got no idea who he is, and I'm sure he's long dead. And one thing he taught me was the wonder of getting close to things, real things, not digital things, real things from the ancient world. A piece of cake that someone might have ate 4,000 years ago. But I think that as I've thought back to that incident and how important it was to me, I thought he taught me something else. Not just the wonder of the ancient world, he taught me that opening cases for people was extremely important. The most important thing you can do for kids or for people who feel outsiders in any way is either literally or metaphorically to open the cases for them. And I think that, in some ways that's in a very, very small way what I've tried to do. But I think it's what the Paideia Institute is trying to do and doing in spades. So I think, Jason, if I had a slogan for you, it's let's open more cases to antiquity and enjoy it. Thank you.